Oh, we have Adam Argo with us, who you've likely seen before. Our intrepid planner from ODOT's planning section, who's leading the state's major policy planning work to update the Oregon Transportation Plan and the Oregon Highway Plan. So he's going to be busy for a while. For today's presentation, Adam will be joined by Jonathan Slason, who's a PE. John is a director in RSG's planning applications practice. Jonathan has also provided professional engineering and planning consulting services to public and private clients for over 15 years. He's worked both nationally and internationally on mixed use land use projects, as well as design and demand for multimodal capacity. John leads the strategic modeling practice at RSG to support long-range planning and scenario planning efforts for MPOs and DOTs like us, including scenario planning and modeling analysis for the OTP. So with that, take it away, Adam and John.
Thanks, Becky. And Carol, we are following protocol that I start a share screen to run the slides, correct?
Yep, feel free.
Okay, one moment, please. Okay. Is my screen appearing?
It's not showing
yet.
up for me yet.
Okay, sorry. Oh, okay. I think it will here in a moment. How about now?
Yep.
So we see your slide file.
Right. I just need to enter.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay.
There it is.
Great. Thanks for the intro, Becky. And just to let everyone know, we've with our 20-minute time allotment, I'm going to start this presentation to give you a little bit of context of where we're at in the Oregon Transportation Plan process, how equity is it fits within the foundational goals that are being developed for this Oregon Transportation Plan update, some of the aspects of policy and strategy where equity fit with wherein equity is found. Then I'm passing the hat to John Slason, who will really give you more insight of what that means in terms of the scenarios that we're analyzing, the way that we're bridging, our policy and strategy work to inform our advisory committee members and stakeholders on getting to prioritization of investments and measuring equity in different facets, looking at an uncertain future. So I will get going here. I also want to acknowledge there are members in this audience of the modeling analysis work group for the Oregon Transportation Plan. And I just want to call out Becky, Alex Bettinardi, Tara Widener, Peter Hurley, and Kelly Clark for being members on that group and for their very valued contributions continually. And this slide is to relate that the primary steering entity advising on the policies, strategies, then investment strategies are coming. If you see where the arrow is, that policy coordinating committee, that's what PCC is indicated on the slide. They just met on reviewing all of the full set of draft policies in the plan and some strategies therein. We took their feedback and we will be refining it a little further to get to the final set of policies. But what we really have to do is move them now to where our scenario work is going to inform the investment strategy element of the plan and the implementation framework piece of the plan, and then move them, from that stage to eventual draft of the plan, and we hope to get to that draft in an engagement with the Policy Coordinating Committee early next year. That's likely very end of January, early February, and we hope to get to a draft plan for release to public comment by the late spring, and dependent on what the Oregon Transportation Commission adoption process is like, we hope to get to a full adopted plan by the summer. So these are the 6 Oregon Transportation Plan goal areas. These were worked through our Policy Coordinating Committee, as well as our other 6 work groups oriented on safety, mobility, social equity, sustainability, climate action, economy, community vitality, and stewardship of public resources. I'll make a quick note that stewardship of public resources is where we are developing policy and strategy on pricing the system, on sustainable funding, looking out to OTP's horizon timeline of 20, 25 years, even beyond that, looking to 2050. So social equity being one of those foundational goals. I'm relating here big ideas from the set of policies found that point to that goal, recognizing the historic damage in particular to BIPOC communities, to communities of color, and it's an acknowledgement of that damage so that there's accountability in what we do going forward in terms of where we put equity into our plan, and considering participation of Oregonians in our processes and plans, as well as our investments, how we're directing our investments, how we prioritize them. And that speaks to the second bullet about implementing an open and inclusive process to build trust. We've done that, by the way, in the way we have stood up our advisory committees, including utilization of our equitable engagement compensation program to actually pay people for the time they're taking away to participate in and inform our plan. To serve and empower members of marginalized, oppressed, and underserved communities is to get them engaged early in these planning processes, as well as empowering them for continual engagement on how we get to decisions ultimately that may mean the delivery of infrastructure, the provision of transit and active transportation, the ability to reach critical services, and reducing household transportation costs for those disproportionately burdened is another aspect of our policies. So I'm going to highlight some key policies out of social equity, and it's really to help set the stage for where Jonathan is going to talk about what we're doing in our scenario analysis and in what we're building in our tools. So in recognizing past harms, it's about understanding the perspectives and diversity of Oregon in decision-making structures. So this policy is really to help bring a fuller aspect of how we've been working hard for the last few years. And I think I speak for all of your respective agencies to get the different perspectives, different members of the community who traditionally haven't been at the table to the processes. And here is where social equity is also tied to access. And that's about improving access for those communities to services, to transportation options, to building better service, and prioritizing investments for those systemically excluded and underserved populations to reduce the transportation disparities. And I'd also note that there is intersectionality in this plan. Our aspects of social equity are not just found under that goal with that name. We have connections and ties. In our mobility goal, I just wanted to flag that that includes policies and strategies supporting development in urban area, compact development in urban areas, It's about ensuring safe, affordable, reliable, equitable access to destinations. And the health tie, I thought I would give that nexus here, looking at social determinants of health and what can we do with our analytical tools in understanding people's ability to access jobs, education, good food, reliant food services, grocers, for instance, healthcare and recreation. And that under the economy and community vitality goal, we also tie health and we tie access, about measuring the ability of people to get to those essential destinations. So accounting for those goals and the analysis is where I pass the hat to Jonathan. And then after Jonathan's done, we'll hopefully have some time to take questions. But thanks a lot. And Jonathan, take it away, please.
Great.
And I will drive for you. So you just tell me.
All right, great. Thanks, Adam. And thanks, everybody. Yeah, we'll cover some slides here rather quickly. And equity in the OTP is being actively explored. And so we have some slides later on. I've got a few to run through to give you some context as to what we're doing in the modeling space, since I know that's really what a lot of folks are interested in. And then trying to dive a little bit deeper into the equity context. So Adam, go ahead. And unfortunately, Adam, I think we had some animation on these slides. So go ahead and click just one more time.
Hey, I'm glad to help enabling
it. Great. So this first off is that we're using the vision of Val State. So thanks to Lee Meng, we have many other professionals involved in the vision eval state model that Oregon's using, which again, testament to the team that's on this call, is the best statewide version of the vision eval model out there. And it's really been robust, and it's been really well validated to empirical data. We're using it in a really exciting way. And many of you have probably received, I think, the TMIP document that went out about modeling deep uncertainty that the RAND Corp had recently published, and a few members of those on the call today were part of the reviewing panel of that. The EMAT method is being used here as we're accounting for deep uncertainty in the development of the OTP scenarios. And a quick primer on that is that we develop a range of inputs that I'll discuss in a subsequent slide, and deciding the ranges of those inputs. And that scoping file is what's giving us the range of those inputs and saying how they're going to be sampled upon as we develop hundreds of experiments, which then can be used to develop this separate meta model, which then will allow us to explore thousands of potential various futures for the OTP. And we'll ground those futures into then assessing which futures are those that would attain our goals. And so to Adam's point, we've embedded equity into one of our key goal areas for the OTP. And so we'll explore how that goal area will manifest, and what policies, what investments are we going to make that will help us achieve our equitable outcomes. So next slide, Adam. And go ahead and click 3 more times. There you go. So I've just put some thought bubbles here, is that we're looking at visions of the future. By and large, we're a future vision plan, and we are output driven. We're accounting for uncertain policies. First, we're going to go through a round of what types of policies, what types of investments are under our influence, if not our direct control. And then we will be imposing uncertainty around those. And we'll be doing that in kind of a 2-phased piece of using the TMIP EMAT interface. So one phase is not only enough for this OTP. We're also grounding this in the limited funding paradigm that we have, is that we are using a cost-constrained environment. We're trying to account for the costs of our policies, as well as how much are we charging ourselves to use the transportation system. many more questions I know than we can answer in this presentation, but there's other presentations that maybe Adam can provide to all of you into some PCC meeting recordings, and then there'll be some documentation that others will be sharing here over the OTP here shortly. But we run all those various futures through the Vision Eval state model, and we're coming up with this meta model that can produce thousands of potential futures. So go ahead to the next slide there, Adam. These various futures are informed by these 13 dimensions at this point in time that are all within our influence. And they account for various changes of transit, walking and biking, travel demand management, vehicle lanes, ITS and operations, electrification, and thanks, Peter Hurley, electrifications, powertrains, and fuels. So we are not just electrification. We're looking at land use changes, the mix of uses, as well as their intensity, intersection density, the density of our land uses. And then I mentioned the way we're paying for our transportation system. So we're putting that all into these multiple filters and shaking it all up and putting it into a meta model that would give us these thousands of potential futures. And so what we're doing then, and Adam, go to the next slide, please. We've said, how are we going to test out which futures are those that we want to support and what inputs led to those futures? At this point in time, because we have 4,000 potential various visions of the future, we've tried to focus ourselves and say, so what happens if we try to, in this first scenario that's in this green box, we said, what if we want to try to attain a future that reduced our emissions, but also balanced it to achieve our equitable outcomes? And in line with the USDOT Strategic Action Plan and the USDOT Equity Plan, and aligned with the OTP's equity vision of reducing the disproportionate transportation costs on particularly lower income households, we've centered the Vision Eval outputs on trying to minimize the transportation costs for low-income households. And we're using that with a particular measure of how much of their household income is spent on the combination of ownership or operational costs for travel. So we've identified that goal of trying to say, how do we minimize the transportation costs on low-income households? We filtered the 4,000 households down and said, we have one scenario. And I'm not going to go into what that scenario is defined by, but it's typically defined by improvements in our land use density. It's significantly enhanced by a higher amount of transit supply, as well as frequency. So Adam, let's go to the next slide. We have the ability, and maybe click twice or three times, I think, here as well. We've have this internal tool that we're using to help us filter and understand. Go ahead and I think click again. Yeah, keep them all going until they're all on the screen. What we're doing here is that we have these this one run. Oops. Sorry, go back now. I know, confusing everybody. I didn't mean to put the animations in. We have these one run that allows us to say, how does this great equitable future look like? And what it allows us to do is say, at the individual household, which the Vision Eval tool gives us, all about 2 million households in the future, how do those households interact with that scenario? And we're able to look at the results of our OTP at a high resolution, at the individual household resolution, as well as then spatially. And we're able to then compare how particularly low-income households, if that's our emphasis on this particular measure, how low-income households are affected by our policies. And that is, what is their VMT? How much transit are they consuming? What's their walking and biking? How much, I guess, yeah, the travel costs that they experience? How much greenhouse gas emissions are they producing? These are all pieces of how they're experiencing our choices. So Adam, go to the next slide. And I've got 3 different pictures here to ground us. Is that first is the social equity index, which I'm sure most of us are aware. And we might have another presentation here right after us about updates to this concept with environmental justice communities and environmental justice zones. So with the understanding that a higher social equity index score is a greater indicator of overburden or being underserved by our transportation or by all of our investments in our policies, we've now laid the spatial outcomes from the travel model or from the VE model and said, how does the intersection of, in this case, VMT, so areas that have higher VMT as well as higher social equity score, where is that spatially happening in this particular scenario? And so we can, this is exploratory, to be honest. This is really fresh off the bat in terms of trying to understand whether this makes sense. So we're tabling this to you all as a concept, but it gives you more of a sense of what we can do. And we're able to produce these measures on the spatial level. So in this case, the darker colors show where the CO2 emissions are higher on a per household basis and where they intersect with a higher social inequity score. And then the last one is interesting on the transit trips. We can see that where we may have low transit utilization, but also married with a social equity index of being underserved. So it is interesting if you compare these three graphics and you can see how certain areas that may have kind of modest social equity burdens, and then they're really underserved by transit. So that gives us a sense to say, well, if we want to achieve greater mobility, at least from an equity perspective, maybe transit in these areas is where we need to invest more than what we were considering in our particular scenario. So I covered a lot there. I really welcome, any questions and have a conversation, but I think Adam and I, we were interested in discussing and making sure that you all know how equity is being embedded in, both from the policies and the goals, but then also how we're using the Vision Eval State tool to kind of probe the equity piece a little bit further.
Well, thank you. That was great. There's got to be some questions out there, or you're just busy thinking and soaking up everything you heard. We have some time for questions, though. Anybody?
It should be apparent why I asked Jonathan to join me, because I think he gave it all, that he put it all on the table, if you will. Mike has a question.
All right.
Yeah.
You're always going to expect a question from me in a void. So I'll just ask a very simple question. How was the reaction of the coordinating committee to this model and presentation? First of all, do they understand it? And then from that understanding, what kind of maybe direction or questions did they have? Because I'm sure you had spent more time with them on this then.
Well, the actual answer is, Mike, they have not gotten this yet, but they're going to in their next meeting, which is December 14th. So in front of that, we are going to provide, as part of a packet of material for them, a memo that really is explaining our scenario, how we have built in the approach of the scenarios and key findings. So your question is what is my stay up all night thinking about question in terms of how are they going to be able to really absorb and understand this in a way that enables them to give informed advice in decision making. So it's coming. And by the way, we keep the packet will be up on our project website. I'll probably try and put in the chat, just in case anyone hasn't seen it yet, a link to the website, because there's a special PCC Policy Coordinating Committee tab so that you can see the materials that we do present to them, and that will include this memo once we get it ready. I see Joseph has his hand up.
Hi, this is Joseph off at the City of Hillsborough. I was just curious, it sounded like one of the proposed actions is to increase density to solve equity, but I was just kind of curious that how is that going to be approached? I know that there's a history of compact density redevelopment that causes displacement of BIPOC communities. I'm just kind of want to make sure that we're not like pushing for a policy that is going to cause displacement. And so just curious how that's going to be pushed in the model.
Maybe Adam,
John,
will take a first attempt, and then I think.
Okay, because Joseph, that is an outstanding question. We'll say this. One reason we formulated the policy that way and was to somewhat be in step with where we go on implementing the CFEC rules, or in the TPR amendments once that happens. But it doesn't mean, we're number by number matching what will come out of that in terms of implementation. But we do need to look at potential futures where that is potentially what does happen, is we concentrate more investment and look to policies that enable more density in communities. But Jonathan, I think, can speak to what our models are telling us that actually really moves the needle in terms of that, in terms of the CFEC rules, et cetera.
Well, yeah, I mean, the CFEC and his coming down and how these policies interplay. I think the land use piece is a really difficult one when we're not going to say we need to densify to a particular level. I think at this point, we're saying clearly there is a nexus between travel behavior and land use, not a surprise to any of us here. And we can demonstrate that in communities that have a certain density or diversity, then travel behavior might look like X. And so like any of the approach that we're planning to use is to say, if this is an outcome that we desire, then there are going to have to be supportive policies that will both support desired outcomes, but then mitigate against adverse outcomes. And I think that's where Adam's, the goals that have already been put into place, Joseph, try to get to that point to say, this is something we like, but we realize that land use policies with that spirit have had adverse impacts on particular populations and communities. And so we have to do this carefully.
Li Ming, I see your hands up.
Yes, I kind of probably related to the last question, although I don't have any insight to share, but kind of more like an update on the vision eval modeling side. I think two piece of kind of update, advancement, and progress will probably relevant is we just about to kick off a project that trying to improve the vision eval land use model that's supported by the ODOT research section. We're about to start, and then Joshua is the person that our contact at ODOT. We are working, of course, with Brian Greger, trying to put a bit more thought on how we can essentially enhance the land use component that allow us to incorporate land use scenarios, hopefully make it a little bit easier to answer some of the questions in terms of, for example, densification, although probably at this point, purely from a technical point of view. Unfortunately, I don't think it will be in time for you to incorporate to use for this cycle of OTP update. Probably next time, hopefully.
Cool.
Another one that also related, also vision eval related, is that I believe we have a proposal submit to NATSI in our UTC, University Transportation Center. I believe we will be founded one way or the other, is we're trying to enhance the equity analysis capacity for vision eval. So of course you have done, from your presentation, I can see you have done a lot of work trying to add the equity aspect post-process through the vision eval results. We're trying to see whether we can, we believe we will be able to enhance the capacity for vision eval for equity analysis. We'll be back in touch when we when we are kind of start that project, I don't have a fixed time when we will know for sure I will get a go ahead on that project yet, but it will be, I think, early next year or sometime in that timeline. So yeah, just kind of update, but related to that, but certainly great work.
Thank you.
All
We
right,
want to
well,
be available.
That's right, and we'll have these guys back as long, as much as we need, so we can learn from it, the work. So it's time for us to move to the next agenda item. We had to do a little bit of shuffle